Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Dirk Vandepoel, your regular instructor. Hi there. And this is Evidence for Evolution. This is a part of the lecture for Chapter 13 that I blew off in interest of time and the interest of doing fun activities, which may or may not have been a good idea. Nevertheless, this information is, not trivial, and I want you guys to know it. So, and you've read about it, yeah? You've already put in the work. If this is lecture to reinforce that material, and so we're going to try recording this lecture, and hopefully this will be helpful. If you guys have questions about this, you can ask me in class on Wednesday. Hopefully that's okay. Let's see. This is evidence for evolution. This is facts we can look at to support the argument that evolution is true, really happens, etc. And I'm sorry you can't see my shining face. This recording device just crashed, and I had my face being recorded at the same time, and it was kind of distracting for me anyway, so hopefully you don't mind seeing me staring at the screen, and you're just seeing the screen here. All right, sorry about that. On we go. So, evidence for evolution. We talked about in class how evolution happening was already, by Darwin's time, pretty well accepted by the scientific community, if not necessarily by society at large. Those who thought about biology and the natural world pretty much agreed that evolution happens. And for that, there was evidence. The fossil record, as we discussed in class, during our little spiel about Darwin himself, was well discussed, not only by Darwin, but by Darwin's predecessors, including the ancient Greeks, as we talked about. And people centuries earlier, or centuries earlier than Darwin, after the Greeks. Anyway, so the fossil record, homologous structures, comparative embryology, convergent evolution. These are all things discussed in your text. Evolution in the lab is something we talked about in class already. The predictive power of evolution and nested hierarchies of characteristics. I'm just throwing in there, not because I expect you to learn them. You can certainly use those little principles to support arguments that you make in exam, but you're not going to have to remember those two as factoids, so I put them in parentheses. Okay, so so the fossil record is perhaps the biggest chunk of evidence that evolution happens. You see species like awesome tusks of mammoths that lived in Siberia. There aren't any elephants in Siberia of any kind, let alone furry ones, anymore. What can you conclude other than that the Earth has changed over time? The species that are there aren't the same as the ones that used to be there. Excuse me, went backwards. Likewise, we can see actual change within a species, or within across groups of species, change within an evolutionary line, an unbroken evolutionary line. If we look at whales and horses, we see what are actually fairly hard to see in biology, which is transitional fossils, fossils that show intermediate forms between a known ancestor and the thing that's alive today. So, for example, the common ancestor of hippos and whales. If we look for relatives of whales that are alive today, hippopotamuses are the extant. You can see the arrow is still sort of thick here. That means these guys are still alive. All these guys, all these guys are extinct here, but but hippos are the things that are most evolutionarily related to whales and dolphins, yeah? But in between them, we can see transitional fossils. We can see fossils where animals that have marine characteristics like webbed feet and so on transition to things that have four flippers instead of two, and a nostril that's moving towards where the blowhole of a whale is seen today. We move further along and we get closer and closer with four flippers, then two flippers, and then whales and dolphins as we recognize them today. Whales change over time, as we can see do horses. If we look at these horses, size of the horses and the feet of the horses, we can see them changing over time, and we can see from beginning to the present intermediates. And again, intermediates are pretty hard to find in biology, as we'll see. Okay, so along with that, humans and other primates evolved from a common ancestor, and we can see that common ancestry in common characteristics between the two, and we can also see transitional fossils that we've found showing the evolution of man. What about DNA? Is DNA a fossil? Get out your clickers right now. No, sorry, don't bother. But you can see the clicker in your mind and click yes, it is a fossil. Fossils don't necessarily have to be things that have turned into rock. If we look at this mammoth, we see that it's furry and juicy. It is still defined as a fossil. Likewise, if we look at DNA inside intact remains, that DNA is often readable, and we can look at it and we can establish DNA tests showing Richard III from Shakespeare fame and royal progression of the royal line in England fame and so on. They found him under a parking lot, kind of like Jimmy Hoffa, although you guys probably don't know who Jimmy Hoffa is. And it's not really important to know, so don't worry about it. Anyway, so DNA is pretty stable, and DNA that's 500 years old, 5,000 years old, like Ötzi the Iceman, 50,000 years old, like Denisovians found in a cave a couple of years ago in Siberia. These are humanoids that are genetically distinct from humans alive today, as established by a single pinky bone from a Denisovian female found in that cave after 50-odd thousand years. As we'll learn later, DNA can be extracted from extinct species like that mammoth. It also can exist in completely intact endospores, as we'll learn later. Fossils can provide evidence of change of species over time. They can also provide evidence of change in the planet's climate over time. There is pretty much no way that ginormous dragonflies like this one, this is not a real dragonfly that this lady is holding. If it were, I would not be holding it. That's right. Anyway, it is a model of dragonflies for which there are many fossils found in a time called the Carboniferous period. People who understand how insect respiratory systems work have concluded confidently that with the amount of oxygen that's in the atmosphere today, you're going to have a heck of a hard time delivering oxygen with what's called a book lung that insects have, some of them have a book lung, and others have these things called tracheates, just little tubes that go in the sides of their bodies. You're going to have a really hard time getting oxygen to the muscles of these guys to give them the ability to fly. If you've only got an atmosphere of 20% oxygen. But the evidence of the existence of these guys corroborates with the other geologic evidence that there was more oxygen in the atmosphere at that time. I think it's about 20% now, and I think it was probably close to 30%. You better not quote me exactly on those numbers, but you can Google it. It's the Carboniferous period, and the amount of oxygen was not the same. Anyway, interesting, don't you think? I sure think so. Anyway, so moving on, homologous structures. This is a very important piece of evidence, and I think this might have been presented for the first time by Darwin. But again, you better not quote me on that. So homologous structures, humans, cats, whales, bats, these are all mammals. And mammals have common characteristics, and they have common characteristics because, as we presume, and Darwin presumed, they have common ancestry. We have common ancestry with fuzzy cats, ginormous whales, and, you know, bats, and all that batty stuff. And if we look at their limbs, we see that their limbs with radically different purposes and radically different shapes and radically different appearances have profound similarities in internal structure. And that internal structure implies common evolutionary origin. That means a common ancestor changed into a human, cat, and whale, and bat through effectively the evolutionary manipulation of the two forearms, the yellow wrist bones, and the single upper arm, etc. The humerus, that is, and the phalanges on the fingers, right? All of which are seen in the same arrangement in all four of these mammals, but again, stretched and compressed and duplicated in the case of the whale's finger digits extensively as needed. Yeah? Okay. So homologous structures are powerful evidence of evolution. What about analogous structures? Well, these show the manipulative power of natural selection and adaptation to environments, to fit environments, even though things have different evolutionary ancestry. Analogous structures are structures that have a different evolutionary ancestry, but have converged to the same function. Bat wings, butterfly wings, and bird wings are clearly different from each other, and yet they're all making their owners fly. Likewise, a shark, an ichthyosaur, and a dolphin, we've got a lot more in common with a dolphin than the dolphin has with either the ichthyosaur or the fish. Why does the dolphin look so much more like the ichthyosaur and the shark? Well, because evolution sculpted the dolphin as an apex predator in a marine environment to fit the shape that succeeds at that job. And that is to have a torpedo shape, have a few really big fins, and a powerful fin in the tail to keep you going fast to catch the fish that you need to stay alive in that particular, excuse me, that was a mosquito getting squished. That'll teach them. Anyway, sorry. Comparative embryology. Do chickens and humans have a common ancestor? Yes, they do, certainly further back than the whales and the dolphins and the cats and the bats and the and so on, other mammals. But you go back far enough and you see the similarities. And those similarities are more likely to be retained in the first formations, right? If the foundational structures of living things are more likely to be in common than the surface structures, the ultrastructure, I guess you'd call it. Yeah, does that make sense? So We don't have feathers in common with chickens, but we do have pharyngeal pouches. These are evolutionary structures that contribute to the formation of things like jaws and lungs in humans, and other structures in birds. Yeah. Distantly related animals still have common structures seen early in their development, and those common structures belie a common ancestry, distant common ancestry. Convergent evolution shows the selective power of similar environments on gene pools. Yeah, so again, convergent evolution of marsupials in Australia are analogous animals, right? The Tasmanian wolf and the regular wolf are both doing wolf-like jobs. Animals, apex predators that rely on speed and stealth to hunt. Likewise, marsupial moles up at the top and placental moles both are occupying a similar niche of digger in the ground, muncher of bugs and other such things. Insofar as there are evolutionary jobs to be done, ways to succeed in an ecological system, then there is evolutionary pressure for the living things that are around at the time to fill those jobs effectively. Those jobs we call niches. Apex predator is a niche. Underground subterranean bug muncher is the niche occupied by marsupial and placental moles. Little seed gatherer is the occupation filled by regular and marsupial mouses and other such. Okay, and again, this suggests that evolution shapes things to fit their environments. We've seen evolution happen in the lab. We talked about how a single bacterium can morph into 3 sort of distinct strains of bottom dwellers, as we see over on the right, surface dwellers on the top and the middle, and aqueous environment dwellers on the left. Yeah. They have distinctive colony forms, and again, they descended over from a single ancestor, given an environment of basically a bunch of broth in a jar left on a windowsill, and within that jar there were distinct ecosystems that those individuals adapted to. Evolution is predictive. Because we know evolution works, we can use it as a tool to make predictions. Like, I bet my enzyme can be made to work better at the job I want it to do by repeated mutagenesis treatments and then selection of a good enzyme. Yeah? Nested hierarchies of characteristics. If we look at the characteristics of a eukaryote, having a nucleated cell, if we look at the characteristics of a chordate, having a vertebral column, if we look at the characteristics of a mammal, having fur and mammary glands and so on, we see that as we move from categories that are general, like eukaryote, to ones that are specific, like Ursus americanus, all of the original characteristics, the nucleated cells, the backbone, the fur, yada, 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 are all maintained in our fuzzy bear. Likewise, all of the characteristics that animals have, right? We can see that because of this, the nested characteristics mirror the pattern of evolution. The way evolution happens predicts that characteristics that are distinctive for a group are retained by all the members of that group. Okay, and with that, that's evolution. When you change from the environment around you, when you look. I'm sorry, I'll stop singing now. Okay, thanks. Bye.